usual for them, right? We're being inundated with text messages and Snapchats, and we've got our teachers asking us things and our parents asking us things and our coaches and our teammates and blah, 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 blah. There's so much noise. It's no wonder we're living in a world that is distracted. And so finding a way to come back to the present moment not only is going to activate that rest and relaxation, our parasympathetic nervous system, and allow us to think more clearly and allow us to not make as many.
You are listening to the Bridging Impact Podcast, transforming leaders on and off the court with host, Coach Furtado. Without further ado, let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. Today, my guest is Siana Sylvester. She is a certified mental performance consultant and the creator and owner of Mental Flex. She has her master's in athletic counseling and works with youth, high school, and collegiate athletes. We're going to have our conversation today on the mental side of sports. So welcome to the show, Siana.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
You got it. So let's dive right in. The first question we always ask is, how has sports specifically made an impact on your life?
Yeah, sport was always something consistent for me in my life. I grew up in Massachusetts, in Central Mass, and the family life was pretty chaotic and could at times be dysfunctional. The consistency was that I always had competitive cheerleading practice or games or competitions, and that was a consistency in my life. So from a very young age, it was something I could always count on, was to have sport. Unfortunately, in my freshman year on the varsity team at my high school, I hyperextended my elbow doing a standard backwards gymnastics skill and went through physical therapy after that. And I thought I was going to be a physical therapist when I grew up. Like, this was great. Unfortunately, I never got that backward motion skill back. And the biggest challenge was the mental game, was being able to overcome that fear of re-injury, not getting distracted and stuck inside my head when it came time to applying that skill. And even though I was assured by so many medical professionals that I was physically capable and cleared to go back to sport and do this skill, I really had struggled mentally with the ability to get over that mental block. And in college, I decided to take a psychology course, and I realized that recovery from injury is just as much mental as it is physical. And I look back on my athletic career and I say, oh, if only I had had a sports psychology consultant to help me work through that, I potentially could have reached higher levels in the sport and been able to maintain that for a longer period of time, and just felt more fulfilled in my athletic career. So sport has had such a big impact on my life personally, creating stability, creating challenge, going from good to great, finding ways to overcome the mental blocks that come with sport. And it's just been something that I'm really passionate about since I was a little kid.
Awesome. Yeah, and I know that we both share very similar values in our love for sport. And so, with that, you talked about hyperextending your elbow and the mental challenge of coming back from that. And I know that there's probably a ton of people that are, listening, whether it's a similar situation like physically or, like mentally, we have all these hurdles. And so, you briefly touched on kind of that path you thought you were going to go down with PT, and then discovering kind of the mental side of sports and becoming like a mental performance consultant. Can you talk about the why you really wanted to kind of shift from kind of the physical side of, physical therapy towards becoming a mental performance coach?
Yeah, the injury is such a tough experience for athletes, and it is so common to experience injury. The athletic career is pretty short, depending on if you play through high school or you get to be one of those small percentage of people who actually play at the collegiate level, and even smaller percentage of people who play at the professional level. It is likely that in that time you're going to get injured. What I find is that a lot of people, if you're listening to this, you're probably a high performer and you're asking yourself, well, what am I going to gain out of this conversation? So let's just assume that most people listening to this podcast are trying to better themselves or better their son or daughter or player. And what oftentimes happens with high performers is we maybe get injured for the first time and it's like a shock to our system. Like, this has never happened to me before. I'm used to being one of the best players on my team. I'm used to things like I work hard, I'm disciplined, and because of that, things come relatively easy for me. And I find I actually had a conversation with an athlete the other day who just signed up for mental performance coaching, who hadn't experienced an injury in her career until she got to the college level. And what she's finding is that just adapting to this mindset that I'm now a player that has had an injury, and now I feel very isolated from the team. Maybe I can't participate as much as I'd like to, even though I'm physically present there. There's a million NCAA rules that, allow only a certain amount of time on the court, for example, in basketball or whatnot. And what I found, getting back to your question, the reason I went into the mental game is that none of that is physical. And it has such an impact on an athlete's career and their trajectory of where they want to go. So a player could be looking at their college experience. Now they're an injured player. They could be saying, well, I've got to get back to how I used to be. I've got to get back to, the number of points I used to score in a game, or being able to move with that level of mobility so that I can reach the goals that I had set for myself before injury. And oftentimes we're so stuck on the past, we're so stuck on what used to be, instead of accepting the new reality, like, I am a player that has an injury. It is no wonder I'm having such a hard time dealing with the fact that I can't play every day. I don't have my stress reliever every day. It's no wonder you're so stressed out. Physically, you used to get all of that out, and none of that is related. I mean, a lot of it is related, but the main focus is not on the mental game. And there's such a lack of presence and influence on the mental game that it has when it comes to things like sport injury. And I just feel like because there's such a lack of concentration on that, there's such a big opportunity to give athletes a chance at reaching even greater levels of potential than they had before they were injured. It just gives that glimmer into what can be, not what could have been. And so I just really believe that if we paid a little more attention to the mental game, that you could see players get to their highest potential quicker, because they're not trying to figure out what works for them on their own, because they've got that support, right? A baseball player who's hitting, right? If they're trying to fix their hitting stance, right, or the way that they swing a bat, they're not going to never go to a hitting lesson, right? If they want to be a competitive player, they're going to sign up for hitting lessons. Like, well, I don't know what's going on here. Like, my mechanics are not working. They're not going to spend years trying to figure out the new way to swing the bat so it works for them. But for whatever reason, athletes wait years, if at all, to seek out mental performance coaching. They wait until there's a major problem to find somebody like me to help guide them through that. So I just love that being a certified mental performance consultant allows athletes to build a greater awareness and reach their goals quicker, because you're not just on an island trying to figure it out all by yourself. Same with an injured athlete. You're not on an island trying to navigate injury all by yourself, right? You've got somebody else in your corner, just like a physical coach would be, helping you manage a really big aspect of sport.
Yeah, 100%. I think one of the running themes that I hear in the why and just the importance of mental sports coaching is being present, right? Being present with where we are at, right? It's a lot of times we wish, like, oh, I remember, like, even for us who are, maybe coaches, I remember when I was in shape and I was in high school, right? We like want to go back to that. Or, for the athlete who got injured, I wish I was, that I actually just had an athlete the other day was like, I used to be able to get up like 4 or 5 more inches before the injury, coach. So like literally exactly kind of what you're talking about. And so before we kind of dive into that, presence and the importance of presence, I want to talk about kind of what you're talking about with physical coaching, but there are a lot of coaches that completely ignore the mental side of the game. And so if you talk about and share a little bit of, kind of, insight, tips, advice on how to incorporate that like mental side of the game into, let's say for me in my basketball programming, but also I'm also a basketball team coach as well.
Yeah. That's such a good question because oftentimes I get brought into athletic departments, colleges, high schools, and I will be in a position where I'm pitching to them what the benefits are to adding a mental performance consultant to their staff. And there are some coaches who are so bought in, right? They're like, I totally recognize that the mental game matters. We're not doing enough to train it. We need you, right? You've got that maybe 20%. Then you've got like the 50% of coaches who are like, well, as long as it's not going to like change the way that I'm doing things or bother me or get in my way, sure. Like they can come in and do mental performance coaching. And then you've got the, bottom half who are super resistant and don't believe in it. They think it's soft, that, teams who hire a mental performance coach, it's because they just can't figure out a way to win and their coaches aren't experienced enough. And, the list goes on. I choose personally not to focus on those bottom half because those people are not ready for change. When it comes to building a mental performance component into the current philosophy of a coach's approach and style, we've got to cultivate the buy-in. What's in it for you to cultivate this in? And how can we implement it into an existing structure? So it could be as simple as adding a mindful moment at the beginning of your practice, right? Every coach says, leave everything that's going on outside of sport at the door, right? Or before you walk into the field. Every coach says some version of that, but they don't actually train athletes or provide an opportunity for athletes to do that, right? They just think that they're a robot and they're going to flick off a switch. And it's like, my whole life is just come on hold because I stepped into the gym. Like that's just not reality. And so adding something like a mindful moment at the beginning, I think I just lost you in my headphones. Can you still hear me?
We're good.
I think adding a mindful moment, something as simple as 1 minute that allows people to arrive to practice, give them an opportunity to let go of all of those things. And you can train coaches how to do this. You don't have to be a certified mental performance consultant to do this. But allowing that moment can allow athletes to transition into sport, right? And that goes into the presence, which I think we're going to talk about soon. But mental performance coaching doesn't have to be, okay, you commit to 8 weeks, twice a week, all of your players are in a room and you're doing workshops and you're doing one-on-one coaching. Yes, that is one way and probably a very effective way. But oftentimes it's not realistic to what the current culture is allowing. And so I think it's important to get the buy-in. What's the science behind mental performance coaching? Who are the best in the world that are using it? Okay. Every Olympic athlete has a sports psychology consultant. Every MLB team has not just one, but a team of mental performance consultants, right? So if the best in the world are using these services and it's good enough for them, what's stopping you? What's getting in your way of providing this service to your players? So get that buy-in, cultivate that awareness. Hey, this is a field. Some people don't even know it's a field. Here's the desire. Here's how it can help you. Right now, how do we give you the knowledge and abilities so that you can implement it into your current coaching style? And then how do we reinforce it over time? So I would often ask organizations, different athletic groups, not only are we going to train, how to build confidence, how to manage attention, how to respond to pressure in the moment. How can we train you as the coach to reinforce what's learned in this workshop? Because coaches are the ones spending the most time with the players. If they're not bought in, it's not that athletes won't benefit. You're just not going to see that culture shift that every player is reflecting on their performance after a game. Only maybe the people who are bought in, who are getting that one-on-one coaching, are doing that, right? So especially in team sports, it's critical that the entire team maybe has the same philosophy so that you can move toward a unified goal with the same approach. So it can be really tough. I would love to say that it's easy. It's not. It is easy to implement the mental game. It doesn't have to be these big, long spurts. You can do the short spurts. And by getting a mental performance consultant involved before you're going through like a slump, right? You're all losing. Like, get them involved early, train it in your culture often, set the rules and expectations at the start of the season. And by the way, then communicate that message 5 to 7 times throughout the season. So it's not like, oh, yep, coach always starts us off, we're going to focus on the mental game, then we never do it. Right. Because then you're going to create resistance, and you're not going to have that trust that you need with athletes to change what they're already doing and implement a new skill.
Yeah, 100%. So, as you know, kind of what I've hear, there are a couple of different options, right? Kind of depends on the age and stage and how much time you have as a coach.
Mm-hmm.
And then just diving in, I'd love for you to kind of expand on that principle of presence that you're talking about and the other principles that you teach in terms of your mental performance coaching.
Yeah, there's so many skills. I will tell you, my philosophy is I don't jump right into skills with players. My belief is that you're a person first and you're an athlete second, and you have other roles and identities within your life, and it's important to nurture those. So something that's happening off the field could be influencing you on the field. Let's get really clear on that. So my approach is first to start with building self-awareness. Let's assume, okay, great, we've now got a better understanding of who this athlete is, what their mental model is, what rules they have for themselves. And then from there, we go into, okay, what skills might help this athlete? Where do we start? A foundational skill that I teach to almost every single athlete, despite learning about them, is mindfulness, right? And mindfulness, based on Dr. John Kabat-Zinn, who is the world leader in mindfulness-based stress reduction. Fun fact, he created the mindfulness-based stress reduction program where I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts. And I have taken the course myself, so I practice what I preach. But oftentimes people think that mindfulness is meditation, and they think they're the same. Meditation is a way to achieve a mindful state. So what is mindfulness? It's the act of paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. So there's a lot there in that definition, and all of those terms are very important. The most important is in the present moment and non-judgmentally. So oftentimes, especially with the younger athletes, I would say high school and below, achieving a mindful state is really unusual for them, right? We're being inundated with text messages and Snapchats, and we've got our teachers asking us things, and our parents asking us things, and our coaches and our teammates, and blah, 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 blah. There's so much noise. It's no wonder we're living in a world that is distracted. And so finding a way to come back to the present moment not only is going to activate that rest and relaxation, our parasympathetic nervous system, and allow us to think more clearly and allow us to not make as many mistakes because we're focused on what's important now. It also provides athletes with an opportunity. So that's the personal life. The personal benefit is you're more present, you're happier, you're more engaged. But let's say a baseball player who's in the box is so curious about, am I going to get a hit? Am I going to get on base, right? They're thinking about the result. Okay. That's forward thinking. That's future. Or maybe we're stuck on the last at bat. Oh my God, I swung at this pitch. I knew that wasn't my pitch. I shouldn't have did that. Or like, I hate that pitch. I hate changeups. Like, whatever those words are. If we're stuck on all of that noise in the past, or we're stuck on all that noise in the future, hitting a baseball is already really difficult. And now you've got all this noise, right? So it is a skill to be able to recognize, here's where the mindfulness comes in. My thoughts have drifted. I'm not thinking about the present moment. And with kindness and being gentle to ourselves, just acknowledging I'm distracted. I want to concentrate on what's important now, what's happening in the present moment. And the biggest thing here is athletes don't think that this is a skill because it requires effort. They think like, oh, I must be doing it wrong. Right? Oh, I'm so bad at mindfulness. I hate breathing. I hate doing all of that stuff. Like I always get distracted. Mindfulness, the goal is not to not get distracted. Over time, yes, that's a benefit. You get distracted less by practicing mindfulness more often. The goal is to notice that you've become distracted and bring yourself back to the present moment as quickly as possible. And then I ask athletes, what would be the benefit of being able to notice my mind is somewhere else right now? And being able to actually bring yourself back to your anchor, that's what we call it. Oftentimes it's your breathing. And what would it be like to do that without being so judgmental? Without saying like, I suck at this. This is so annoying. This is frustrating. So that's one of my core skills that I do teach is the act of mindfulness. And I do that through one, building self-awareness of noticing when does my mind drift the most, right? So what are your green lights? I'm most present when, all right, I've got some hits, I'm having a great day. Things are going really well. I'm able to stay more in the moment. Oftentimes athletes describe this as being in the zone. Then we've got the yellow lights, which are, this is our warning signals that say, I'm starting to lose my focus. Okay, I made an error in the field, right? Or maybe in basketball, I missed my last 3 free throws, right? Or I missed my last free throw, or I didn't win the jump ball, or whatever it is. Those could be triggers for certain athletes. Coach said XYZ to me and it pissed me off and now I'm aggravated. If we can identify what those warning signals are, we can come up with a routine, a reset routine to come back to green. Oftentimes, as we know, drivers do, they blow through the yellow lights because they're very quick to get to their destination. There's a big risk in doing that. If we go into the red light zone, which is where we've totally lost control, it's not impossible to come back from there, but it can be really difficult to get back to green. So being able to notice what those warning lights, bringing the awareness to the athlete to know what are the warning signals for me personally that I'm starting to lose control. So we start there. Then we do mindfulness, things like breathing, things like a neurofeedback device called Focus Calm, which measures your brainwave activity. The cool thing about that device is that it's measuring it with your eyes open. Oftentimes, a lot of those neurofeedback devices are for sleep and your eyes are closed. And we know that almost every athlete everywhere does not play the game with their eyes closed. So it's very important that you're able to do this skill with your eyes open, right? So those are 2 ways that you can work to kind of cultivate a more mindful state. And I also go into like the science of attention and all of those things. We work toward that. But we really start with building awareness, coming up with a reset routine. How do you implement mindfulness, not just like at home when you're trying to fall asleep, but like in the moment, right? Where in your play is it appropriate to do a mindful moment? A soccer player who's just been running, the whole game, they're 60 minutes in and they're fatigued and they're tired. They're not just going to like get subbed out and do a mindful moment and come back in. Right. So we have to also work with players within the constraints that they're in. How do we implement this now on the field, on the court, right? On the golf course, whatever that is for them, tailoring it so that just like the coaches who want to maybe put mental performance coaching into their existing style, how do we now help athletes implement mental skills into their existing constraints of the environment that they play?
That was a lot of really great information. So I want to just make sure I summarize, get it right. So we're talking about number one is right, building that self awareness. And you kind of went into, I had some follow up questions, but a lot of it's around the dialogue. I think asking those questions of like, what's the benefit, right? Getting them to kind of think about the positive side of things instead of, because I feel like sometimes maybe how I present it or other coaches may present an idea, right, of building self awareness. Oh, it feels like a chore, right? But if you present the benefit and like they can perform at a higher level, right, they'll be able to buy into it a little bit more, like you were talking about previously. And then having that reset routine, once we kind of recognize, some of the green light, right, when we're doing well, and the yellow light, and I can see how this could be like really beneficial outside of sports too. Like in terms of like for me, obviously I live in LA. It's car culture getting cut off, kind of like you're talking about. There's a lot of
Hmm.
yellow lights, a lot of things going on, and I know for me also, and I'm sure for you as someone with a full time job and kind of a business owner, right? We have all these thoughts all the time, and then we also have personal lives, right? So being able to recognize and not necessarily control, right? I think that's probably been the biggest shift I personally have is redirecting those thoughts, like not necessarily getting mad about, oh, my mind's drifting, but just practicing. It's a skill to redirect those thoughts, like through that mindfulness. So I'm curious, as you continue to help athletes build that mindfulness and continue to redirect and set those reset routines, like, I think sometimes one of the things I've heard in the basketball world is like a mistake clap. So you do two claps like after you make a
Hmm.
mistake, and so that's like a reset routine, basically just to wash it away. Or I don't know. I've also heard of some teams like literally flushing a toilet just
Yep.
after a loss. Like so there are
Oh
different things
yeah.
that a team can do, right, that can mentally kind of just clear you. So
Yeah, there's so many
yeah.
cues. Yep, the clapping is one. With baseball players, we do progressive muscle relaxation, so the squeezing of the bat, right? That's a productive way to release that frustration. Physically turning your body and looking out into the foul pole, or with a basketball player, I might have them physically turn their body and look up at the scoreboard, right? Or look up at the top of the basket. Use some self-talk, right? Not motivational self talk. Oh, just let it go, like blah, blah, blah. Maybe it's more like instructional self talk. It's like, what's important now? What do I want to focus on? Some athletes can't just flip a switch, right? It's not as easy as just kicking the dirt or, like you said, flushing the toilet. Sometimes we need to acknowledge and validate that, like, hey, that really sucked, right? And so redirecting your attention, it's also noticing when is it appropriate to process that crappy thing that just happened. During performance, it is not a productive time to be hard and tough on yourself. If that worked, we'd all be great by now, right? If we could just, if being self-critical in the middle of a game helped us get better for the rest of the game, everyone would be great. So it's being able to recognize and notice, okay, this is not the time to be reflecting and processing that mistake, right? A more productive time to do that, right? We don't want to store that energy and let it build up, because then we're going to have an outburst, because our bodies can only take so much. Our stress system can only take so much. We do still need to process that stuff, right? It's just not during performance. We got to do that after in our reflection. What was good about that performance physically and mentally? What could have been better, and how can I do it differently next time? That's a productive way, right? To say that really did suck, right? It's no wonder I'm feeling so down on myself after I made that mistake. Here's how I'm going to address it the next time I'm in that situation. And the other comment I wanted to make is that getting the buy-in for athletes, oftentimes I see coaches and parents, especially, just telling their players, like, this is what you did wrong. Like, why can't you just get it right? We spent all this time on training. Like, you should just be able to do this by now. You can do it in practice. Why can't you do it in a game? And they're so frustrated, right? So instead of telling them all the stuff that they screwed up and telling them that they can do it, right? It's all coming with the best intention. It's just pushing them further away from change. Change is an internal process that needs to happen. And so instead of asking a question like, okay, and also timing matters, right? Maybe not on the car ride home. Maybe they're still really pissed off, right? That might not be the time to ask this question. So ask yourself, when is an appropriate time to ask my player this, right? As a coach or as a parent. And then you ask them something along the lines of, I'm really curious, how did you feel like that at bat went for you? Oh, well, I did XYZ wrong. Like I really screwed that up. So what action are you going to take to learn a little bit more about that? How can I help you achieve that? Asking the question instead of pointing out all of the answers, right? We call this the writing reflex, just trying to fix it, making it right. Instead of just jumping right into that, just get curious without an agenda of trying to push them in a direction. You will notice that you're more likely to get the result that's positive by asking those questions, those open-ended questions, instead of just telling them everything that's wrong, which they probably already know.
Right, 100%. Yeah, because and you're helping them, right? You talked about change is an internal process, right? If we always like spoon feed them the answers, like "Why did you do this?" or "Why did you do that?" instead of like saying, "Hey, let's talk baseball wise. Like, what did you see on that curveball, right, when they swung or missed,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh, like I was out on my front foot," and kind of getting them. That's how they learn, right? They have that learning process. And one of the things that you kind of touched on at the beginning of when you were talking is talking about that instructional self talk. So one of the things that I've been learning, or I know, like, I'm not sure what the exact thing is, that if you like are thinking, like, I'll use myself for example. If I like am thinking too much when I play, like go down, up, shoot, right? Like you want to flow. You don't want to be thinking exactly. So what's the proper way to like mentally give ourselves reminders about to flow instead of like trying to give ourselves like specific instructions and we're thinking? Because I know I'm drawing a blank on the word for it, but like when our thoughts are like when we're thinking about acting, like it's not a natural motion. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of words that could come to mind for what you're describing, like a lot of different sports psych theories, and it's really common.
Yeah.
Like when we're learning a new skill, oftentimes we do need that many cues in order to follow it. But let's say you're a basketball player and you're in high school or you're at the college level, and like you find yourself thinking in that very like step one, step two, step three kind of way for a layup, right? Something that your body just knows how to do. You've been doing it probably since you were 5 or 6 years old, right? Playing at the college level. So oftentimes we're too internal. So this is Nedifer styles of attention. And what you're describing is we're very internal and we're very narrow. We're very specific, right? And oftentimes this is where athletes choke under pressure, right? We're so in our heads that we can't focus on what's happening in the external environment and react to it. And so we are not flowing as you described it, right? We're so internal. So oftentimes we've got to just first of all we have to recognize, again, self-awareness. Hey, I'm too in my head right now, right? I know this because I'm telling myself every single step I need to take to go take a layup, right? So I've got the evidence that supports I'm too in my head right now. What we need to do is shift our attention externally, right? And at that point, it doesn't really matter if it's narrow or broad. But for example, a pitcher who has the yips, right? God, yep, I said it. Nobody panic. A pitcher who has the yips and can't throw it over to first base for whatever reason is very in their head. They're very much thinking like, what if I miss? What if I overthrow it? Like a run's going to score and all these things are going to happen. And like, God, I'm such a sucky pitcher, or whatever those thoughts are internally. And then let's say he's like, okay, I'm gonna lift my leg at this point, and then this is gonna happen. It's still very internal, step by step process. We want to shift our attention externally and narrow, right? See the spot, hit the spot.
Hmm.
That's very simple. That's very clear on what you want the brain to do. Oftentimes the mistake I see players making is don't mess up. Don't overthrow it, right? Don't shoot it between his legs, right? Whatever those thoughts are, but you do not want to do, you've just given your brain the instruction of what you want it to do because the brain doesn't recognize contractions. So instead of saying don't overthrow it, instead you might want to say like hit him in the chest, right? Give your brain the instruction of what you want it to do. Can go for like even parents who have little kids. Instead of saying don't hit, hey Johnny, don't hit Tommy, don't hit him. Instead, we want to use the instruction, keep your hands to yourself. You're trying to achieve the same outcome, it's just a different instruction.
Absolutely. Yeah, I remember having this conversation on our pre-podcast call because that was something that I realized. I had a communication coach, Betsy Buderick, on last year around this time, and it was the same thing. I was like, oh my goodness, right? Like as basketball coaches, we always yell, don't foul. Or, like if
Mm-hmm.
you're a baseball coach, it's like I'm trying to think about it in terms of like, don't get fooled by the curveball or whatever it may be. We always
Yep.
use don'ts, right? Because it makes sense to us, right? Don't do it. And then we
Yep.
get really angry as coaches when our athletes do it. Instead, it's like, for don't foul, right? Chest up, don't hands off, right? Move your feet, and just giving
Yep.
reminders like that is so huge.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. You're spot on. You're spot on. Just adjusting that self talk. And when the instructional self talk becomes too repetitive, too step by step, shift your attention externally, do a reset routine, simplify it, simplify it. And you might even, if you're working with a mental performance coach, it can become very like more nuanced and complicated. But we might introduce visualization at that point, right? Let's reflect on some times where you've executed that skill very successfully, right? Maybe we need to build our confidence that says, hey, wait, I actually do know how to do this skill. What was happening during my best performances? Well, I was focused on the square on the backboard and just driving up to that square and hitting it. I wasn't thinking about taking left foot, right foot, like
Right.
whatever the steps are. So it just gives athletes an opportunity, one, to recognize here's what's going on, and then potentially create a reset routine, shifting your attention, maybe using some visualization to pull on some previous experiences. But again, if you're doing this, if you're listening to this and you're like, I got to go do all of this on my own, that's why working with a mental performance coach can be helpful, because it can really direct where you might spend most of your time so you can get to that result quicker instead of trying to figure this all out by yourself.
Right. That makes a ton of sense. And so you briefly just touched on it right now as we kind of enter our like, eighth, ninth inning of our podcast. Our 2 minute drill, as we'd like to say, is like confidence is a big one when it comes to like the mental side of games. And you just touched on it a little bit, but I'm sure you have a lot of athletes that come to you and are like, like I was playing so well here and now I'm not. So where does that confidence come from? Because I know obviously you have to do the preparation, right? Like I always tell my athletes, like you can't be confident at something you don't practice at and with
Yeah.
intention, right? Like I'm not going to be a great chef if I'm only making Trader Joe's frozen food, right? So at the same
I
time,
think that's pretty good, but
it's pretty good. Yeah, I'll be able to walk in at Gordon Ramsay's kitchen, no problem.
yeah, you got
Um,
it.
exactly. But the mental side of things, like how do athletes, where does that confidence come from?
Yeah, the myth about confidence is that, okay, players are just confident and they give them a label and they're like, oh, that's how it always is. Well, confidence is actually very fragile.
Yeah.
And it's usually because we wait for the feeling of confidence in order to act confidence. And actually, what we want to do is reverse the order of that. Confidence, the action, comes before confidence, the feeling. Okay. And this isn't fake it till you make it, right? And maybe some people believe in that and that's what works for them. This isn't fake it till you make it. We have to take back our power and our control, that we have the abilities to do hard things, right? And so what I often find athletes doing is they wait for something good to happen, something successful to happen to feel confident. And if we always have to wait for those things, oftentimes a lot of those things are outside of our control, then we're saying we have no power and trust in our confidence abilities, right? We've given that away to the gods, kind of like a superstition. Instead, what we want to do is say, wait, I'm in control of my ability to be confident. What actions can I take that demonstrate confidence, right? And so what is your body language when you're walking up to the plate or the free throw line? What does a confident player do after they make a mistake? Are they, punching the cooler? Are they shaking their head? Are they showing their disappointment? All normal and common reactions, but those aren't aligned with a confident player who believes in themselves. So what are the behaviors that are aligned with that? Preparation is a huge one, right? You just mentioned this. If we're not nervous for a test that we studied for, we're not scared for an opponent that we've already studied the film. We feel confident in our abilities. Confident people don't walk up to the plate and say, oh, I don't know if I can hit this guy, right? Instead, they say, I trust my abilities. I've done everything that I can to prepare for this moment. I'm ready for this. It's just because it requires effort doesn't mean that you don't have to be confident. Confidence can require effort, and it's very fragile. It's very easy to lose if you're just waiting for something successful to happen. On my Instagram, I have a highlight that talks about the 9 sources of confidence. So if someone's curious, they can go on there, click on the highlight that says confidence, and see, okay, well, if I'm always waiting for something good to happen in order to feel confident, then I'm probably missing on a lot of opportunities to take that control back. And so how could I do that? What are the other 9 sources? And how do I create those for myself in my life?
Yeah, it's huge. Creating that confidence comes internally, and I really like that. Like action then leads to feeling. I think that's a good breakdown even for athletes, and it's something that I've heard before. Like reading, like how kind of you can tell like just body language wise, like how someone feels about their ability. As they come up to the plate, as they go to the free throw line, right? Like just understanding that body language and kind of what it projects, obviously to your teammates, but what it projects for yourself, right? When my shoulders are back and I kind of have like a little bounce in my step, right? Versus like
Yeah.
I'm like kind of stiff and rigid and like slowly walking with like a little bit of a nervous look. I'm looking down, like, there's certain different cues, and I'm sure, that post breaks it down really well. So as we kind of wrap up, and before I give you the opportunity to share more about, mental flex, what would your final pieces of advice be for the coaches and parents and some of the athletes that are listening to this episode with, kind of how to step, boiling down a lot of the wisdom that you just shared with them?
Yeah, I think that to wrap it up is I would ask you, whoever's listening here, to ask yourself what percentage of your game is mental. And there's always a percentage. And then I would ask you to reflect on what action are you doing to build your ability to be mentally tough? What are you doing to train the mental game? If the answer is nothing, what do you want to do about it? What action do you want to take so that you can show up your best, even when it matters the most? And the last point I would make is do not wait until something is wrong to find a mental performance coach. Like you're selling yourself short. There's such an opportunity to be the best player that you want to be, the best coach that you want to be, the best parent that you want to be, by finding the support and guiding you so that you can gain your mental game. So those would be my 2 pieces of advice, that to reflect on what are you doing about your mental game, if at all, and how can you be proactive in your mental game instead of waiting for something like injury or a hitting slump or I'm so stressed out I can't even de-stress. Like, let's not wait for us to get to that point to seek out a mental performance coach.
I love it. And so where can people find you to learn more? If they want to connect with you on social media, you do drop great posts, and, if they want to continue to work with you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So you can go to my website, mymentalflex.com. And if anybody's interested, they can schedule a free consultation there. I'm very reachable and very often on Instagram. So please Instagram message me at mymentalflex. And that's where you can find more about me.
Well, I appreciate you so much for coming on and sharing so much wisdom. I have multiple pages of notes, and I'm going to have to distill it and how I want to make sure I give that back to the athletes. And I know that the coaches and parents got a lot out of this as well. So thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule, Siana.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate you having me on.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Bridging Impact Podcast. We'd love it if you would like, subscribe, leave a comment and a review on whatever platform you're on. It's the best way to help us grow. We appreciate you for doing that. We'll shout you out on social media. I'd also love if you connected with me on social media. Let me know your thoughts. And this is why I do it. I want to share knowledge and wisdom from experienced leaders to people like yourself and myself, so we can have this dialogue and move forward, make an impact on the world. So stay tuned, stay subscribed. Cheers.